us there to the land of Zion, next year in Jerusalem.
Welcome to Theology in Perspective, the Bible teaching ministry of Dr. Daniel Woodhead. This program is dedicated to bringing you relevant insight into the biblical text that pertains to our time. Here is Dr. Woodhead with today's Bible teaching.
Welcome to Theology in Perspective, the Bible teaching ministry for Western Michigan. And as if you've been with us for the last 6 weeks, you know that we've been going through the really interesting prophecy in the Old Testament book of Ezekiel the prophet, who was carted away to Babylon in 597 BC by King Nebuchadnezzar. And there, between 597 BC and 586 BC, he prophesied to Israel to repent so that they would not have to go through what he was going through, and they didn't listen. So in 586 BC, as Ezekiel was prophesying, Nebuchadnezzar came back and he sacked Jerusalem, nearly destroyed the temple, and carted them away to Babylon. Ezekiel received prophecies 2,500 years ago about issues that are prevalent today and even yet future to us. Now, you know we've been going through this prophecy for a couple of months, and we've looked at a variety of aspects of it. And I have with me today a couple of theologians that have been instrumental in my understanding of these scriptures. Dr. Gary Fisher of Lion of Judah Ministries, and one of my seminary professors, Dr. Thomas McCall. And I'd like to welcome you gentlemen here today and thank you for coming on the show and helping us develop an even deeper insight into some of these issues. Now, the burning...
Dr. Woodhead.
Well, thank you. The burning issue, no pun intended, is these weapons. We've looked at these weapons, and many people look at this and say, well, this prophecy must have happened many, many years ago. These people are using bows and arrows and chariots. And, I talked through this a few weeks ago and looked at the Hebrew names for these things, and they are actually generic names for weaponry that is used today. For example, the Hebrew word chet is just a missile. It's a missile, and of course Ezekiel wrote down arrows because that's what was prevalent at that time. But it could be a missile today. Merkava is a Hebrew word for chariot, and that's what the Israelis call their tanks today, the Merkavas. So could you folks just help enlighten us about these weapons, because I think your insight would really be appreciated by the audience.
Well, one of the strongest arguments for ancient weapons has to do with the horses, not just arrows and bucklers and shields and so forth and so on, which might have a modern counterpart, but it goes into great detail in Ezekiel 38 and 39 about the horses, masses of horses being ridden down into Israel, the mountains of Israel and the plains of Israel from the invading armies. And not only that, but it describes at the end of the battle, when they are destroyed, that the birds and the beasts will have a great feast on the horses, as well as the humans, the soldiers, and so forth and so on. And if the Merkava or tanks, I don't think I think the birds and the vultures and the beasts would have indigestion trying to eat them. So that is an argument for more primitive warfare. And that needs to be taken into consideration.
Well, that's an interesting concept. I know that modern day armed divisions of military are called the cavalry, and it's not uncommon for military even today to use horses in these mountainous regions in the Middle East. So the probability of genuine horses is very strong. I agree with you. I think they could actually be there. And I think that that lends credence to the idea of this prophecy being still future to us.
Danny, I'd like to have input here, if I may. Thank you for having me on the program. It's a great honor to be with you and Tom. Tom, you brought up the horses and the feast that the birds are going to have on the soldiers and so forth. When Ezekiel wrote this 2,500 years ago, between now and the time he wrote this, Israel had exited the land. 70 A.D., the Romans destroyed most of the infrastructure of Israel and dispersed the Jewish people all over the world. And all of the would you say the agriculture of Israel just died, and the land became just a malaria-infested swamp? They had 5 swamps, and most of it became desert. And so the point I'm getting to is these birds are mentioned in Israel are going to feast on these soldiers and horses and that kind of thing. For 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years, those birds have not been present in Israel. Why? Because there was nothing there for them to feed on. The place became a desert. And so the birds have been migrating over Israel for a couple thousand years, but there was no reason for them to stay in Israel. There was nothing to eat. So they would just fly over and go to Asia or Europe and use Israel as a flyway. Today, that situation has changed completely. Israel has become an agricultural wonder. There's all kinds of fish ponds and wild animals and so forth and so on. And so what we're seeing today are thousands and thousands and thousands of birds of prey that migrate out of Africa that are on their way to Asia and Europe. They stop off in Israel. And we've got a little character named a griffin vulture that is now taken up residence in Israel. And that little guy can eat about 160 pounds of food every 2 days. He has an 8-foot wingspan. His body is 4 feet long. And there's several hundred of those that have taken up residence in Israel. There's several thousand of them in the world. And today, Israel is in the position where it can host those birds, and I think it's relevant that now we're talking about these prophecies being fulfilled, and the birds are starting to rally in place for this upcoming battle.
Gary, that's one of the 4 main requirements for this battle to be in the near future. One is that Israel's a state again, because this prophecy clearly says that Israel's a state. And you just touched on one of the biggest ones, is that the waste places are now inhabited. And it's not a wasteland anymore. The agricultural development and so on that you just cited is phenomenal. The other one is that Israel is living in unwalled villages.
Consider that. Mark Twain made a trip to the land of Israel. It was then called Palestine, and wrote his book Innocents Abroad. But anyway, when he visited the Holy Land, he was very disappointed because it was a wasteland then.
Right.
And it was desolate, and very few Jews lived there. And very few people live there as far as that goes. So, but now that Israel's back in the land, it has been revitalized tremendously. And there's 7 million Jews. In fact, I heard 8 million Jews there now. And it is a vibrant nation with magnificent cities, and as Gary said, the fauna and flora are abundant there, and they are not only feeding themselves, but they're exporting food and technology and all other things, and drip irrigation. Wonderful things are happening in Israel that look like what the situation that Israel is in when Ezekiel 38 and 39 are fulfilled.
Wow, that is really interesting, you know, and it lends to the other two fundamental requirements that this prophecy gives, and that is, one, Israel is in unwalled villages. And, you know, you go to Jerusalem today or any of the other cities, and the only thing that's walled right now is the old city of Jerusalem, and that's just quaint, you know, it's beautiful, and everybody loves to go there, but the rest of Jerusalem doesn't have walls around it. And the reason that is because the last requirement is that Israel is dwelling securely. And we all know that that's so controversial because that concept there, dwelling securely, has been argued for so long, and that dwelling securely is what causes people to place the actual invasion at some time other than the near future to us. Now, Gary, what does walled or Israel dwelling securely mean to you?
Well, in verse 8 is where we first see the word securely mentioned about Israel, describing their condition. Verse 11, the word again, and verse 14, the word again. Securely all three times. And that word is betok. Betok. And its alternative reading can be confident.
Yep,
so
exactly.
if we interpret it as living confidently in the land, that would describe Israel of today. The Israeli Defense Force is one of the most highly trained defense forces in the entire world. They are rated on several military websites as probably the number one rated infantry in the world. Their Air Force is rated number 3 in the world, behind the United States and China, I believe. Could be wrong about that, but I believe they are rated 3rd or 4th. Either one of those makes a good point. The little country, 70 miles wide and 280 miles long, has the 3rd rated Air Force in the world. And they have several times proven that they can fight wars on several fronts and kick the backsides of their enemies, and they are an incredible fighting force. And the people of Israel today are living confidently in that ability to fight off whatever comes their way.
Amen.
Just to add to that, I've just recently heard about the stock market in Israel.
Amen.
The stock market in Israel, did you know that there was a stock market in Israel? Yes. And it is up 10% in 2014.
Wow.
So that's a measure of confidence and security.
Absolutely.
And whether the rest of the world thinks so or not, Israel is in good shape.
Oh, my goodness, yes. You know, Israel is dwelling securely, as secure as any other country that is a westernized democracy that has an anchor in the land. I mean, the land was given to them. Let's not even talk about God giving it to Abraham, but the UN gave it to them in the fall of 1947. And they have this land. They are there securely. I have a quick personal anecdote to relate about that. I am still taking modern Hebrew lessons from a teacher up in Netanya. And last year I said to her, well, aren't you concerned about these wars going on in Syria and all these activities? I said, aren't you concerned about the rockets? And she just sloughed it off as a non-event. It happens all the time. I mean,
right.
She just wasn't concerned at all.
Well, Danny, there's two major ways to look at this. you already mentioned one where there are some that like to think about this word securely, meaning that Israel is living with no threat. And my position there is that there is never a time until the millennium when Israel will live with no threat from an invading army. There is a qualifier there. When they're living confidently in the land describes today and the Israel that we see today. However, there is a coming time when they will live under a pseudo peace, a false peace, when the Antichrist of Daniel 9:27 signs a peace agreement, and there will be 3.5 years of a false peace in which it looks like Israel is living securely. Is it likely that the battle will take place then? I would say no. It looks like more to the point that the battle could occur at any day with Israel living confidently in the land right now.
Absolutely. I fully agree. I think Tom agrees too.
Very
This
much so.
this dwelling
And just
securely.
to underscore that, remember just this recent war with Hamas in Gaza, they were pouring thousands of rockets aimed at Israel. And what happened? There was the Iron Dome. The Patriot missiles and all were disabling those rockets if they fell to the ground.
The people that I'm in contact with over there, when I talk to them about those things, they view it as an irritant and nothing more than that.
Yeah.
There's a shopping center, a very nice shopping center called Mamila. It's right next to the old city. And Joan and I were going there quite frequently last year when I was at the university. And recently, the IDF and the local police department and the Mossad and other groups got together and they thwarted a suicide bomber before he even got a chance to think about doing this. They knew that this guy had access to these things, and they stopped him before he even was able to assemble anything. They have a very, very God-given prowess to secure their future there, and nothing's going to take it away. And let me just say one more thing, is what other country has perfect peace? There's no such thing. And we're secure over here. We know that there are robberies and diseases, and we got terrorism here and there, but we're secure.
That's right.
Yeah, that word secure is not to be translated as without a threat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Tom, you were going to say something.
Just that they really do feel very secure there, and with reason. And of course, there is a biblical promise that no weapon that is formed against you will prosper.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
If you'll let me get in here, I'd like to comment on that. It was a little post that I put in my next newsletter, and it is a testimonial that was recorded on IsraelToday.com of one of the guys that was operating the Iron Dome. And he was tracking a rocket that was coming out of Gaza during this recent Gaza war, and the Iron Dome missile that he was going to shoot this rocket down with wouldn't fire. And so he is sitting there got 4 seconds to react, and 2 seconds later, when his failsafe did not work, he thought the missile was going to hit Tel Aviv, and he sat and personally watched and gave his personal testimony that he watched this missile turn in midair and went out to the Mediterranean all of its own and exploded out over the Mediterranean. Now, what was it? No weapon formed what?
Right.
I saw a news clip about 6 months ago of a Hamas guy complaining that the Israelis' God is causing their own missiles to turn back and fire on Hamas. He says it's just not fair. It's just not fair.
I saw that too.
It's precious. Gentlemen, there's the reason that I have brought those concepts into this discussion is because I want to talk about when this invasion is going to happen. There is no historical precedent to say that it has ever happened before. I mean, the circumstances outlined in the prophecy are only prevalent today. And if you look at Russia, for example, that is the primary progenitor of this, with this man whose title is Gog, G-O-G, he wants to come south to get some sort of booty, some gold, silver, who knows what he wants to come and get. And Israel, as you said, before recently was a wasteland. Before 1948 or so, it was a wasteland. There's nothing here.
Right.
Some have speculated, well, maybe it's the chromium and the other chemicals in the Dead Sea. Maybe he'd want that, or maybe he wants to just get into the Middle East so he can turn on his neighbors, the Muslims, that are supposedly his quasi-friends, and once he does that, he'll get their oil. But I understand, and Tom, I would ask that you help us with this, because I know you know a lot about it, that there's been some natural resource finds there in the recent last year and a half or so that are just enormous.
Ben Gurion made a famous joke back when he was prime minister that Moses led the people of Israel around in the wilderness for 40 years until he finally brought them into the land in the Middle East that didn't have any oil. Well, you can't say that now. That was true before. They hadn't found any. But now there are tremendous resources of oil and gas that have been discovered. The offshore finds that they've made are phenomenal. And now they have found that there is an enormous reservoir of oil underneath the land of Israel that can be reached by the new technology of fracking.
Right.
And they're studying that very closely, and they are very seriously considering using that technology to get oil. So it's become one of the oil meccas of the world.
You know, what's interesting is that today, well, Russia has been historically a persecutor of the Jews, from the shtetls to the czars persecuted them, and oh my goodness, the things that they did to them. The Germans that are mentioned, Germania in this prophecy, we know what they've done in the Holocaust, and the Muslim nations have had a war against them for a long time. Recently, the Russians have invaded the Ukraine, in the eastern part of the Ukraine. They have come into the Crimea. They're growing closer to Israel. They've threatened Israel, and they've aligned themselves with the Muslim nations. The Muslim nations have done more than threaten Israel. With this recent group called ISIS, they have vocally voiced their opposition to Christians and Jews and said they're going to exterminate us all. And the Jew first, and then we're going after the Christians. So the people of the book they want to take out. These threats have become so prominent recently that this prophecy is becoming more real. Even for the people that haven't looked at this in the detail that you gentlemen have, it's becoming very, very obvious. Now, I just wanted to mention a few things here, that the Bible doesn't give us exact dates of things. There's a long chronology from the creation of the world all the way through to the eternal order. And it gives us a relative position of these prophecies. Now, what has been discussed about this prophecy has always been in relationship to the Great Tribulation, the 7-year Great Tribulation. Some have said, well, it's going to happen after the Great Tribulation. It's going to happen in the millennial kingdom. And others have said, no, that 75-day interval before the millennial kingdom starts and after the tribulation, that's where it's going to happen. And I would say probably, correct me if I'm wrong here, that most would say, oh no, this is the Battle of Armageddon. This is the Battle of Armageddon. It's the last battle last stage of the last battle in the Great Tribulation. Some say it happens in the middle of the tribulation, mid-trib. But the data seems to me to point to it happening before the tribulation. In the last show for the viewers, if you could remember, I talked about the weaponry and the residue of the weapons burning for 7 years by
Yeah.
heat. And there is a 7-month period, either before anybody can go in to start cleaning up this residue, or there's 7 months of cleaning. You can read it either way. But the 7 months and the 7 years produce data that forces this prophecy to get a little clearer as to when it's going to happen. And I see this happening before the Great Tribulation, which is sometime yet future to us, but before this Antichrist world leader is going to sign his covenant with the nation Israel. Now, how do you gentlemen see this positioning?
Agree with you wholeheartedly, Dan. The 7 year period is significant, and it happens to be the same length of time as what Daniel, Ezekiel's contemporary, came up with in the 70th week of Daniel. That's 7 years also. Is that just a coincidence? I think not. I think they are coterminous. They are the same period of time, which means that the Gog and Magog attack would be before the tribulation begins. Perhaps it is the impetus for the Antichrist to come on the stage and make his treaty and confirm his treaty with the nation Israel.
Now, that's an excellent point, because once this happens, what is going to happen is, according to the text here, the invaders lose their political prowess on the world scene. They're done. They don't have any more power. And that leaves only the Western democracies to coalesce and somehow, out of that set of countries that have sort of like-minded economic and freedom ideas, there's going to be a 10-nation confederacy. The Bible doesn't tell us whether it's geographic or whether it's economic or some combination of the two, but it's out of that 10 that the Antichrist comes. So this could very well be, as you pointed out, Tom, the catalyst that causes this one world leader to come into power.
There is a really strong implication in Ezekiel 39:11 that justifies Tom's point. We are introduced in Ezekiel 36 at the end of the chapter. While all the trouble's going on around Israel, it says the passers-by continue to come through Israel, and I believe that's a reference to the 3.5 million tourists that continue to come, irregardless of what happens and that kind of stuff. Well, the passers-by are mentioned again in Ezekiel 39:11, and it says, when the Gog is destroyed, he will be given a burial ground, and the burial ground will block the activity of the passers-by. So here we've got if they're tourists, here we got them. They're not going to be tourists in the middle of the tribulation or at
Exactly.
at the end of the tribulation. When do we have tourists in Israel? Today.
Right now, yep.
Including your groups, Gary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
There's another aspect to that I think we need to bring out, and that's what the text says, that those people will not be able to touch any of the bones of the people who have been conquered. And they have men that, my old King James is pretty quaint. It calls sever out men of continual employment. I mean, they got professionals. Wait a minute, you just tell us where the bone is and we'll go get it. We don't want you touching these things, which lends credence to the idea that this is probably nuclear weaponry, which would burn, for a long time. Well, gentlemen, I think it's been a pleasure having you. I think our time is out, and I need to say lahitraot.
You throw out.
And
Blessings to
Later,
you both.
Lila.
We hope you have been blessed by this message today on a contemporarily relevant Bible topic. Dr. Woodhead has been teaching the Bible for 25 years. He is a pastor, an author, and conference speaker on various biblical subjects. Dr. Woodhead is the Dean of the Jewish Studies School at Schofield Seminary. His seminary teaching includes the Old Testament and Biblical Hebrew. He has attended Hebrew University in Jerusalem and Hebrew College in Massachusetts. If you would like a DVD of today's program, please write us at Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan 49420. Again, that's Post Office Box 48, Hart, Michigan 49420, or call us at 877-706-2479. That's 877-706-2479. Once again, 877-706-2479. The cost is $15. Let us know if you have any questions about today's broadcast. We look forward to providing you with continuing Bible messages each week on this station. God bless you.
Take us there to the land of Zion. Next year in Jerusalem, the Shana Haba'ah Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. Oh, hear, O Israel, hear. O Lord, thy kingdom come, thy will be done next year. The Shana Haba'ah Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. Over there,